We had gone back and forth, this Iowa State representative and I, in an email exchange over several weeks this past spring. We had shared our differing views about the recent public school funding crisis in Iowa. I was encouraging him to consider a compromise that would see our schools funded at a higher rate than he and his fellow Republicans in the House deemed fiscally responsible. We both believed that we had facts and reason on our side, or else we probably wouldn't have bothered to continue the exchange. He was not the only representative who was willing to engage with me. Several did. But even as I was disappointed by his position, there was something refreshing and dignified in his manner and style. He was more respectful in tone than many others who responded, and he seemed genuinely curious about my point of view, a few times ending his messages to me by asking for my thoughts. In my final email to him, I thanked him for the generous way he had engaged with me and told him that I found his analysis to be helpful, even as I could see we would continue to disagree. Then I closed by thanking him for his attention to me and for his service to our state. His message back was the shortest he had sent. In his simple and kind response, Representative Ken Reiser of Cedar Rapids got me thinking more than any previous message in our exchange. He wrote, "Reverend Stringer, I appreciate you being an engaged citizen and respect your service to the Lord." Now, it's not the first time that someone, upon seeing or hearing the Reverend next to my name, has mentioned something to me about serving the Lord. For most people, that's what ministers do. So it makes sense that they would say it. In our Christian-dominant culture, it's simply shorthand for being a religious leader. I get it. And I'll admit there can be some advantages to being seen as a servant of the Lord, especially when I'm writing to encourage elected officials to pursue progressive policies that are less commonly held these days, it seems, by those perceived to be serving religion. It's one of the reasons why I use the title Reverend when I write elected officials. My title seems to add some gravitas to my messages. Enough that I suspect I receive more attention and maybe a bit more respect than I would if I didn't use it. And so in these moments, especially with elected officials, I don't usually bother to seek clarification of what they mean by Lord or go out of my way to explain myself. Can you imagine if I did? "Dear Representative Reiser," I could write back, "thanks for the respect you hold for my service, but I have to ask you, what Lord do you think I'm serving? It's possible that I'm not serving the Lord you imagine. You see, I am a Unitarian Universalist minister, and we UUs are not bound by creedal statements about God, and are typically, though not universally, uncomfortable with notions of God as a paternalistic force controlling our behavior, a master we must serve even as he dictates our circumstances. Is this the kind of Lord you mean? Because that's not my Lord, and I just wanted you to know that." Blah, blah, blah. I do get tired of my knee-jerk need for self-definition. My desire that other people know where I'm coming from, so they don't assume I'm one of those kind of clergy, so they understand that my faith doesn't necessarily mean the same thing that other people's faith means. Duh. I'm tired of being defensive about my religion. And so in moments like this email exchange with Representative Reiser, when I am thanked for my service to the Lord, I don't say anything, at least beyond myself. I let people have their own understandings and use their own language to make sense of what I do, knowing from experience that they're going to view me through the lens of their religious perspective no matter what I say. And I have learned that responding defensively or trying to explain myself without the sincere interest, open curiosity, and generous respect of the other person rarely leads to deeper understanding anyway. Still, Representative Reiser's assumption that I serve the Lord got me thinking, so what kind of Lord do I try to serve? And then, almost as if on cue, as I looked toward this service, I opened a letter that I got this summer from a local woman named Arlene, who agreed with me that I don't serve the Lord. She wrote that she read with much interest my letter to the Des Moines Register that was published back in July, my letter that read, "With the recent Supreme Court ruling on marriage equality, I am delighted that Iowa will no longer be a place for destination weddings, and that couples will no longer have to travel hundreds of miles just to have a symbolic wedding that would not be honored in their home state. I'll admit I'm a bit sad too," I wrote. "I'm sad because each of the out-of-state couples whose marriages I had the privilege to officiate reminded me of the beauty of human companionship, the pain of discrimination, and the courage of the human heart to follow love and not be shamed into denying one's true self. My life is richer for the opportunities I have been given to stand with these couples. I will never forget them." My letter was signed the Reverend Mark Stringer. But I made no mention of Unitarian Universalism in my letter, so I'm figuring that Arlene was confused, as she assumed we were both serving the same Lord. She wrote, "From your words, you appear to be a kind, caring man whose empathy encompasses those who are straining against tradition. But therein lies the problem." She told me, "The world seems to be taking on the God role and deciding for themselves what is fair and good, and that God calls us to live according to his holy word and not according to doing what is right in our own eyes." She then shared Bible passages as a reference point for her position, warning that I have been called to a higher calling and that as God's ambassador, I will be judged more harshly, before letting me know that she contacted me because of her genuine concern for my future, which is probably why she concluded by asking, "Will it be heaven or hell? It's yours to decide." I get this kind of letter every now and then, and each time I do, I am reminded of where some of my knee-jerk defensiveness comes from. Still, in the end, Arlene is right about one thing for sure. The Lord I aim to serve is not the same as hers. I do not serve the kind of God she follows, or it seems she follows, and seeks to protect me from, a God who would demand that I arbitrarily refuse to do what I sense is right in my own eyes and heart, that I close myself off from the lived realities of my fellow humans, and that I adhere to narrow interpretations of ancient scripture at the expense of the inherent worth and dignity of my neighbors. And so Arlene's letter offered me yet another opportunity to consider the qualities and expectations of the Lord I do serve. And while I wouldn't use the word Lord typically, and in fact I rarely use the word God, finding them both so laden with expectations and presumptions as to render them almost meaningless in conversation, I do seek to follow something more than myself. I do strive for a kind of spiritual discipline and dedication to open my mind and my heart to the movement of what I would call the holy in my life and in my interactions with my neighbors. I do seek to live in accordance with a higher standard than just my own thoughts. So what is this higher standard? How would I describe my understanding of God? What is the Lord I seek to serve? Well, the closest I've been able to come to a definition of this Lord is one that I first found articulated in the writing of a 20th century liberal theologian named Henry Nelson Wyman. The project of Wyman's life and theology was to identify for himself an answer to a similar question. The question was, what operates in our lives with such character and power that it can transform us as we cannot alone transform ourselves, saving us from evil, endowing us with the greatest good, provided that we give ourselves to it the very best that we can? What is this force? What is this thing that operates in our lives? Wyman argued that the primary concern of religion is often thought of as belief in God. But he said the word God is irrelevant unless the word is used to name that which can actually help us bring about the greater good, no matter how much this operating reality may differ from all the traditional ideas about it. Or as I would put it, what any of us believes about God or no God matters far less than what those beliefs or understandings lead us to do. Or, as some might describe our most faithful Unitarian Universalist commitments, Deeds matter more than creeds. For Wyman, the ultimate commitment of his religion, the operating reality worthy of the name Lord in human life, is our promotion of and participation in what he labeled creative interchange. Creative interchange, a process that occurs when we engage with one another with the expectation that we could be transformed by the encounter, that we could, through our interaction, create within us an awareness of the original and unique experience of another person, enabling us to expand our own perceptions and to thereby search more deeply into the basic problems of human existence, and at the same time deal constructively with the most urgent social problems of our time. Creative interchange, as Wyman described it, doesn't happen by itself. It requires participation. It requires others. It requires reverence. It requires faith. It requires truth-telling, too, albeit with humility and curiosity about our blind spots. It requires the expectation that there are possibilities beyond our own preconceptions and inevitably narrow vision, possibilities that could lead us to more than we could know and conceive and achieve on our own. I find that pursuing creative interchange as the Lord I serve is challenging, and it's demanding, and it's humbling. Wyman recognized that no matter how faithfully pursued, attempts at this kind of creative interchange would almost always be imperfect and incomplete, prone to error and distortion, rarely experienced in full. Still, pursuing creative interchange was the best answer he could find to the question of a religion worth having. And it's the best I have found, too. And I say this even as I am keenly aware of how often I fall short in my service to creative interchange. How often I turn away from possibility, how often my own shortcomings and predispositions and cultural background and emotional baggage get in the way of what could be possible. Were I to engage with those around me with more curiosity, were I to focus less on seeking agreement and confirmation of my own predispositions, and to focus more on the gifts of growing my understandings of life as it is lived, life as it could still be possible, were we to create conditions whereby more creative interchange could happen among more people more often. Giving myself to the pursuit of creative interchange as my ultimate commitment, my Lord, if you will, does not require adherence to any particular dogma or language other than a reverence for discovery and a willingness to engage with difference. It does not require that I always be at peace or without fear or without doubt. In fact, creative interchange compels me to fully relate to my fears and doubts, seeking to better understand and try to work with them. It does not require acquiescence to the status quo or to systems of injustice. In fact, creative interchange invites me to question the status quo and to seek to undo that injustice. And no matter where I may be embedded in that status quo or injustice, I can still access the gifts and challenges of creative interchange if I am willing to have it, and I treat others as though they can have it with me. In this way, I find creative interchange to be an ultimate commitment in complete agreement with our 7 principles as Unitarian Universalists. Creative interchange respects inherent worth and dignity. It offers a just and equitable way to approach human relationships. It presupposes acceptance of one another and embodies a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It upholds the right of conscience and aids the use of democratic process. It is a means toward a peaceful and a just world community. And it respects the inherent and independent web and our unique places on that web. Therefore, the pursuit of creative interchange has become, for me, the primary spiritual practice of my Unitarian Universalist faith. Again, I say this fully aware that creative interchange is not always possible. I say this mindful that no one, including me, has the capacity at all times for the kind of wholehearted, whole-minded communication that creative interchange demands. Perhaps the most succinct description of what is required for creative interchange, and I would argue to be a Unitarian Universalist faithfully, is found in the story of a conversation a friend recently overheard a fellow UU teenager having with her son. The teen said, I've gone to church here for 12 years and I still don't understand it. Her son said, what do you mean? It's actually pretty simple. We have 7 principles, but I can summarize the entire religion in one sentence. Don't be a jerk. Except he didn't say jerk. He said a word that begins with A and ends in hole. It's true, at least for me. You can't really be a jerk and be faithfully Unitarian Universalist. I mean, not all the time. I mean, we all miss the mark, right? You can't really be a jerk and successfully pursue creative interchange. You have to be willing to leave room for difference, even in those times when you have to continue to disagree. You have to be more humble than haughty. You have to be more curious than closed. You have to seek to understand more than you seek to convince. You have to be willing to be surprised more than you need to be certain. You have to be willing to explore the understandings of others and to cherish the pursuit of those understandings, thereby informing and developing and enriching your own humanity and the humanity of those around you. In short, you can't really be a jerk. You have to be willing to love. Not merely sentimental or mushy love, but a kind of love that seeks the truth. The truth, at all times the truth, even when it hurts. Even when it shakes you up inside. Not just the truth you find embodied in your own views or in any single religious text or cultural preference, but the truth of what it means to be human. The truth of what it means to be imperfect and sometimes contradictory. The truth that at all times we are sharing a time and place with others who are also imperfect and sometimes contradictory, just like us. We have to be willing to love. We have to be willing to look into each other's eyes and experience and their views and find our own perceptions sometimes affirmed, sometimes expanded, and sometimes changed. We have to be willing to love. This creative interchange, this pursuit of expanded awareness, this love, this is the Lord I try to serve. How about you?